My job involves watching doors. Usually the men on the other side are armed, dangerous, and the subject of federal warrants. We plan for weeks, mapping entry points, studying schematics, and preparing for every violent contingency. But on this particular Tuesday, the threat wasn't a meth kingpin with a sawed-off shotgun. It was Carol from the HOA, a woman whose weapon of choice was a $5 lockpick set from Amazon. And her target was my front door. All because she had a problem with the placement of my mailbox. It all started, as these things often do, with something monumentally trivial: a mailbox. 6 months prior, I'd bought this house for the quiet. After 20 years in law enforcement, the last 12 as a SWAT commander, my only ambition for retirement was the steady, predictable rhythm of silence. The rustle of leaves, the hum of a distant lawnmower, the satisfying thunk of a well-made door closing. This neighborhood, with its manicured lawns and identical oak trees, seemed like the perfect civilian buffer zone. I was wrong. The silence here wasn't peace. It was the tense quiet of a place under constant surveillance. The first letter arrived on crisp, beige letterhead, sealed with an embossed logo of a generic-looking eagle. It informed me in the gravest possible terms that my mailbox, the standard-issue black metal box installed by the builder, was in violation of Article 4, Section 3C of the Covenants, Conditions Restrictions. The violation? It was, according to their measurements, 2.5 inches too close to the curb. I read the letter, then walked outside with a tape measure. The asphalt was still warm from the afternoon sun. I knelt, the gravel of the shoulder digging into my knee, and measured. From the leading edge of the curb to the front of the mailbox post, exactly 36 inches. I pulled the CCRs from my welcome packet. Article 4, Section 3C stipulated a setback of 36 to 40 inches. I was perfectly compliant. My first interaction with Carol was that weekend. She marched up my driveway as I was trimming the hedges, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a ballistic shield. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice a pitch too high, a forced smile plastered on her face. "We sent you a notice." "I got it," I said, not turning off the hedge trimmer. I let it hum between us. "There seems to be a mistake. The mailbox is at 36 inches. The bylaws state 36 to 40. It's compliant." Her smile tightened. "Well, the Architectural Review Committee prefers a more centered aesthetic. We feel 40 inches is more visually harmonious. We're asking all new residents to adjust." "You're asking, or you're requiring?" I asked, finally cutting the power. The sudden silence was heavy. "Because the document you sent me is a formal notice of violation, which implies a requirement. But the bylaws, a legally binding document, state I'm compliant. So which is it?" She was not used to being questioned. Her entire posture shifted from nosy neighbor to petty tyrant. "It's a requirement. The notice stands. You have 14 days to cure the violation before fines are assessed." I didn't argue. I just nodded. "Carol, is it? I'll need that in writing. Specifically, I'll need a formal letter from the board, citing the bylaw that gives the Architectural Review Committee the authority to supersede the written CCRs based on a preference for a centered aesthetic. Please include the minutes from the meeting where that specific interpretation was voted on and ratified. You can mail it to me. The mailbox is right there." I went back to my hedges. She stood there for a full 10 seconds, sputtering, before marching off. That, I learned, was a declaration of war. The harassment started small. A week later, another fine. This one for my lawn. Apparently a single dandelion had bloomed near the driveway. I had photographic evidence time-stamped from my lawn service showing a pristine, weed-free yard the day before. I sent a polite, formal email contesting the fine with the photos attached. No response. The fine just appeared on my monthly statement. Then came the garbage cans. Another violation notice, this time with a blurry photo attached. My cans were visible from the street at 9:05 a.m. on trash day. The bylaws stated they must be concealed by 9 p.m. on the day of pickup. I was at work by 6 a.m. I couldn't physically bring them in until I got home. When I pointed this out in another email, citing the logistical impossibility, the response was a single curt sentence: "The rules are the rules." This was no longer about a mailbox. This was a power play. And if there's one thing I understand, it's the dynamic of power and control. They weren't enforcing rules. They were testing my compliance. They were seeing how far they could push. So I stopped reacting and started preparing. My old security system was fine for a suburban home. My new one was better than what we install on government buildings. 4 4K cameras with overlapping fields of fire, night vision, and ultra-sensitive audio microphones. One pointed at the street, one down the driveway, one on the porch, and one covering the side gate. Every email, every notice, every fine was scanned and saved to a dedicated, encrypted hard drive. Each file was named with a date and exhibit number. I created a timeline, a meticulous log of every interaction, no matter how small. I purchased a copy of the county plat map and had a surveyor come out to restake my property pins, just in case. The escalation I was waiting for came via a community-wide email from Carol. It announced a new proactive property integrity initiative. Citing a vague concern about unseen structural and pest issues, the board was now claiming the authority to conduct brief, unscheduled exterior inspections of any property, including fenced backyards and screened porches, to ensure total compliance. I knew exactly who that initiative was for. It was a blank check for them to trespass. My response was a registered letter, drafted by a lawyer I had on retainer, a former prosecutor I'd worked with for years. It was a formal cease and desist, informing the HOA board that any uninvited entry onto my property, including any area behind the front-facing wall of my home, would be treated as criminal trespass. It cited the exact state statutes they would be violating. That letter should have been the end of it. For a rational person, it would have been a massive red flag. But Carol wasn't rational. She was arrogant. She saw my letter not as a legal boundary, but as a challenge. Which brings us back to my front door. On my phone, I watched her urge Gary forward. "Just check the knob," she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial hiss, perfectly captured by my microphone. "The letter said he wasn't home on weekdays. We just need to document the peeling paint on the door frame. It's an exterior inspection." Gary, fumbling with the pics, was clearly out of his depth. "I don't know, Carol, it feels like enforcing the rules the way they're meant to be," she snapped. "He thinks his lawyer letter scares us? We are the board. We have the right. Now hurry up." I watched him jam the pic into the lock. The alarm on my phone chirped silently. Lock tampering detected. I took a screenshot. I hit record. I sent a single text message to the county sheriff's dispatch, a personal friend of mine. "Active B in progress. My address. Non-violent, but get a car rolling." Then I leaned back in my chair, turned up the volume on my phone, and prepared to watch the show. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea how much evidence I already had, and they certainly had no idea that their pathetic little power trip was about to come to a very, very abrupt end. The beauty of a high-quality audio pickup is its unforgiving clarity. I could hear every nervous swallow Gary made, every frustrated sigh from Carol as his clumsy attempt to pick my lock failed. "You said you watched a video," she hissed, the sound so crisp it felt like she was whispering in my ear. "It looked easy." Gary mumbled something about it being a master lock in the video, not a Schlag deadbolt. The distinction was lost on Carol, but not on me. My front door wasn't just a barrier. It was now a tangible piece of evidence in a criminal investigation. My text to dispatch wasn't an act of panic. It was a tactical move. Calling 911 would have triggered a full lights and sirens response. That meant adrenaline, raised voices, and a chaotic scene. I didn't want chaos. I wanted control. I wanted documentation. My friend, the shift supervisor, understood. He'd dispatch a seasoned deputy, someone who knew how to handle a situation with calm authority. The goal wasn't just to stop them. It was to officially document their actions in a way that would be admissible later. Back on my phone screen, Carol's patience finally snapped. She shoved Gary aside. "Give me that." She took the pic set, looked at it like a foreign object, and then did something astonishingly brazen. She tried to use a tension wrench to simply pry open the door at the jamb. The splintering sound of the wood on my doorframe was sickening, but also deeply satisfying. That wasn't just attempted breaking and entering anymore. That was property damage. I took another screenshot, zooming in on the gouge in the fresh white paint. Exhibit G. Vandalism. Just as she was prying, the distant but rising siren began to cut through the quiet afternoon air. Their heads snapped up in perfect unison. Panic finally registered on their faces, replacing the arrogance. It was a beautiful sight. "What was that?" Gary stammered, his eyes wide. "It's probably just a fire truck," Carol said, but her voice lacked conviction. She dropped the lockpicks, which clattered on my concrete porch. A crucial detail. She was abandoning the tools of her crime at the scene. A black and white county sheriff's cruiser rolled silently to the curb, its light bar now flashing in a hypnotic, rhythmic pulse. Deputy Miller, a man I'd known for a decade, stepped out. He was 6'4", with a calm demeanor that could de-escalate a riot. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't shout. He just stood there, letting the weight of his presence and the uniform do the work. "Folks," he said, his voice calm and even. "Having some trouble with the door?" The backpedaling was immediate and spectacular. Carol instantly morphed into the concerned, helpful neighbor. "Oh, officer, thank goodness. We were just passing by and we noticed the door frame here looked damaged. We were worried there might have been a break-in. We're from the Homeowners Association, just doing our rounds." I almost laughed out loud. It was such a textbook, amateur lie. Deputy Miller walked slowly up the path, his eyes missing nothing. He glanced at the splintered wood, then at the discarded lockpick set near Carol's feet. "You were inspecting the damage with these?" he asked, nudging the set with the toe of his boot. "Those?" Carol looked down as if seeing them for the first time. "Oh my, I have no idea what those are. Someone must have dropped them. See, this is what we were worried about, the criminal element." From 50 miles away, I forwarded the video file from my phone directly to Miller's work email with the subject line, "Evidence." I sent a follow-up text. "Check your inbox, full audio and video. They've been at it for 5 minutes." Miller's phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out, glanced at the screen, and a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He looked up at Carol and Gary, who were still trying to sell their story. "Well, ma'am, sir, I'm going to need you both to stay right here," he said, his voice shifting from neighborly to official. "The homeowner just sent me a live feed of what he calls a bee in progress. Says he has you on camera with audio trying to pick his lock and pry open his door for the last several minutes. So, we've got a few things to talk about." The color drained from Carol's face. Gary looked like he was about to be physically ill. The game was over, and they knew it. Miller took their IDs, ran their names, and formally documented the incident. He collected the lockpick set as evidence, bagging and tagging it right there on my porch. He took detailed photographs of the damage to the door frame. He was building my case for me, piece by methodical piece. He issued them both with official citations for attempted criminal trespass and vandalism. He explained that since I, the homeowner, was pressing charges, they would be receiving a summons to appear in court. As he handed Carol her citation, he added a final professional touch. "And ma'am," he said, his voice flat, "lying to a law enforcement officer is a separate offense. I'd advise against doing it again." They practically ran back to their cars. When I got home that evening, the first thing I did was inspect the damage. The gouge was deep. It would need to be filled, sanded, and repainted. It was a small thing, but it was a violation. They had physically damaged my home in their attempt to control me. But the real work was just beginning. The criminal charges were one front. The civil and administrative front was the HOA itself. The next morning, I sat down at my desk with three things: the stack of violation notices, my meticulously organized evidence folder, and the HOA's own governing documents. Carol and Gary had made a critical error. They had personalized their enforcement. They had weaponized the bylaws to pursue a personal vendetta, and in doing so they had overstepped their authority and broken the law. My lawyer had already explained the concept of breach of fiduciary duty. An HOA board has a legal obligation to act in good faith and in the best interest of the entire community, not to harass a specific homeowner. Their attempt to break into my house was the ultimate gift. It was an unambiguous, indefensible act that invalidated everything they had done. It turned their petty crusade over mailboxes and dandelions into a serious criminal matter. I spent the next 2 days drafting. I wasn't just writing a complaint. I was building a tactical plan. The first step was a formal, notarized letter to the entire 5-member HOA board, as well as their managing agent and their insurance carrier. The letter laid out the entire timeline of harassment, from the first mailbox notice to the criminal citations. It included copies of every false violation, my email correspondence, the surveyor's report, and the police report from the break-in attempt. It formally demanded 3 things. First, the immediate removal of all fines and a written retraction of every violation notice. Second, full reimbursement for the cost of repairing my door and for my legal fees to date. And third, a copy of their directors' and officers' liability insurance policy, as I was now putting them on notice for a future civil claim for damages related to harassment and property damage. This wasn't a request. It was a formal, legal demand that put the entire board on the hook, not just Carol. Now her fellow board members, who had likely let her run wild without oversight, were personally implicated. Their insurance company was now aware that their client was engaged in potentially criminal behavior, something that could cause their premiums to skyrocket or their policy to be dropped entirely. I sent the packet via certified mail with return receipt requested. The clock was now ticking. Their move. They could choose to retreat, cut Carol loose, and try to mitigate the damage. Or they could double down. Given Carol's ego, I was betting on the latter, and I was already preparing for it. The email announcing the emergency board meeting was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive propaganda. It spoke of recent security incidents, the need to clarify community standards, and the importance of addressing litigious threats from a non-compliant homeowner. Carol wasn't just doubling down. She was trying to poison the well. She was going to frame me as the villain, use the fear of a lawsuit to rally the other homeowners, and perhaps even try to pass a special assessment to fund the HOA's legal defense against me. She wasn't building a defense. She was building her own coffin, and I was happy to hand her the nails. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of stale coffee and cheap particle board. About 30 homeowners were there, most looking either confused or vaguely annoyed. I saw the whispers and pointed fingers as I walked in. Carol had clearly done her work, spreading her version of the story. She sat at the head table, flanked by the other 4 board members. She looked confident, defiant. The others just looked terrified. They knew they were in deep. They just didn't know how deep yet. I didn't come alone. My lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Ben, who radiated an aura of expensive, unflappable competence, walked in with me. We didn't sit in the back. We took 2 chairs right in the front row. The whispers in the room died instantly. Carol's smug expression flickered. This wasn't part of her plan. She started the meeting by launching into a prepared speech, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. She spoke of her unwavering dedication to maintaining property values. She described a troubling incident where a simple welfare check and exterior compliance review was met with aggression and legal intimidation. She never mentioned picking a lock. She never mentioned the police. "This homeowner," she said, gesturing vaguely in my direction, "has threatened our community with a costly lawsuit. We, as your board, believe we must stand strong against this kind of bullying. We were acting in accordance with the authority you granted us in the bylaws." That was my cue. Ben stood up slowly. "Ma'am, will you be taking questions?" Carol was flustered. "There will be a QA portion at the end of the presentation." "I'm afraid this can't wait," Ben said, his voice calm but filling the room. "My client and I would like to offer a clarification to your narrative. We've prepared a small packet for the other homeowners so everyone can follow along with the actual facts." I stood up and began handing out the packets I'd prepared. 50 copies, spiral-bound. On the cover was a crystal-clear, high-resolution photo of Carol and Gary on my porch, lockpicks in hand. Inside was everything. A timeline of the harassment, copies of the bogus violations, the surveyor's report proving my mailbox was compliant, a full copy of the official police report with their names on it, and glossy 8x10 photos of the criminal citations and the damage to my door. A wave of murmuring swept through the room as people opened the packets. Faces turned from confused to shocked, then to angry. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were staring at Carol. "What you call a welfare check," Ben continued, letting the homeowners absorb the evidence. "The county sheriff calls attempted criminal trespass and vandalism. These are not allegations. They are formal citations, issued on site, based on irrefutable video evidence." He paused, then gestured to a small projector I had set up. "Evidence which we'd be happy to share." I hit play on my laptop. The entire room watched in dead silence as the video from my doorbell camera filled the pull-down screen. They saw Carol and Gary approach. They heard her order him to pick the lock. They heard the scrape of metal on metal. They heard her frustrated hisses. They saw her grab the tools herself and physically pry at my door, splintering the frame. The audio was perfect. The final scene of them freezing at the sound of the siren, then pathetically lying to Deputy Miller, was devastating. When the lights came up, the silence was thick with fury. A man in the back of the room stood up. "Is this true, Carol? Did you try to break into his house?" "It's been taken out of context," she sputtered, her face beet red. "The board authorized. We were concerned." "The board authorized a felony?" someone else shouted. This is where the ambush was sprung. "That's an excellent question," Ben said, stepping forward. "It brings us to the issue of liability. You see, when a board acts in good faith, they are protected by the HOA's directors and officers' insurance policy. But when they commit willful criminal acts—" He held up a single sheet of paper. "This is a letter I received this afternoon via email from the HOA's insurance carrier, a copy of which I also included in your packet. I forwarded them the police report and video this morning. They have officially informed the board that, due to the willful and criminal nature of the actions undertaken by President Carol Miller and Mr. Gary Smith, they are invoking the criminality clause in your policy. They will not be covering any legal fees, damages, or settlements related to this incident. Furthermore, they are issuing a notice of non-renewal for the HOA's policy, effective in 30 days. He let that sink in. The backfire was complete. "What this means," he said, making eye contact with the other 4 board members, "is that Carol didn't just expose herself to personal liability. She exposed all of you. And by rendering the HOA uninsurable, she has exposed every single homeowner in this room to massive financial risk." The room exploded. It was a full-blown insurrection. Carol was being shouted down from all sides. The other board members looked like they had seen a ghost, realizing they were personally on the hook for my damages and legal fees. Within 10 minutes, a motion was made from the floor for an immediate, to vote of no confidence in the entire board. It passed unanimously. An interim board was nominated and approved on the spot, led by a retired accountant who looked at Carol with pure, unadulterated contempt. The aftermath was quiet and efficient. The new board immediately rescinded all my fines, issued a formal apology, and their first official act was to cut a check for the door repair and Ben's legal fees, paid directly from Carol and the other 4 outgoing members' personal funds, after Ben made it clear a civil suit would follow otherwise. Carol and Gary pleaded guilty to misdemeanor trespass to avoid a trial. They sold their houses and were gone within 2 months. The silence I had moved here for finally returned. Not the tense, paranoid silence of before, but a genuine peace. The new board is reasonable. The rules are enforced, but with common sense, not as a weapon. My experience taught me a valuable lesson. Your property rights are not a suggestion. The CCRs are a contract that binds the HOA just as much as it binds you. And when someone in a position of petty power decides to push, you don't have to be a SWAT commander to win. You just have to be calmer, more organized, and more prepared than they are. You meet their aggression not with anger, but with overwhelming, undeniable proof. You let them walk right into the trap they set for you. What's the most outrageous power trip you've ever seen from an HOA? Let me know your story in the comments below, and if you enjoy seeing a well-laid plan come together, make sure you subscribe for more stories of homeowner justice.